can help
I
it.
first met Al in Woodstock, New York. He lived directly across the street from our home. We had moved from out of town into the center of town. I was 9 years old and Al was 12.
Big brother.
Is that true?
You're talking.
No. Now tell the
My
truth.
turn will come.
No,
Big brother. So he's your big brother.
we were both 9.
Yeah.
Thank you for that money.
That's good. No, Tom was already living in Woodstock. And my father loved to go to any kind of sporting events on weekend. He wasn't a sporting man, so he loved to go to ice skating races and ski jumping and all that stuff. And they opened, of all things, a little, what they eventually called midget racing track in Woodstock. The American Legion did it for a moneymaker. And at those times, people were taking old Model A's and stuff and cutting them down, making little race cars out of it. So we went up to this race, and on the way back, I remember coming through Woodstock, and there was a sign, oh, as big as this, or a little bigger, on the front of Twin Gables saying, "For sale." And the next thing I knew, when school was out in June, we moved to Woodstock. And that's when we got there and got going to school, of course. I met Tom that lived right across the street. Twin Gables was a guest home. It was opened in 1920 and was only run as a summer place in the beginning, and then went full-time, and my parents bought it in 1940, and they ran it for many years, and then my wife and I ran it for 17 years and retired from there. That's just a brief of that. Go ahead, if you say something, then I'll come back.
Well, Woodstock was a heaven place. All of my friends were the sons and daughters of artists, composers,
Famous and near
writers,
famous.
sculptors, painters, craftsmen. It was so different from so many other villages. It was unique, and I loved every moment of living there.
Yeah.
So memorable.
Yet it was still just a farm town at that time. It was very small. The center of town was around a village green, like a typical New England, with the big white church, as you always see in New England. Could have been put in New England and you would have known the difference. But it was all farming around there. You could go to find farm fields all around, and cows were mooing and pastures and so. Right next between Tom's house and my house, the gentleman, he had cows, he had chickens, they made butter, so we got our butter and our eggs and our milk. All we had to do was walk next door and get that. So that's the kind of place it was. The newest building in town at that time was the firehouse, which was just a couple of doors down for us, that had been built in
The
I
town
think,
hall.
yeah, like 1938 had been built, and that was about the newest building in town. And as Tom said, the art was just starting to come there, but there were two, it started out with this called Bird Cliff. This was what the Englishman, what was
Whitehead.
Whitehead came from England looking for a place.
Well, could I tell?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Whitehead, the Whitehead family were one of the very wealthiest families in England. One of the things they owned were the Nottingham woolen mills in north central England that go on for several miles, these huge brick buildings with smokestacks, and it got to be so toxifying and troublesome that at the time of William Blake in the early 1800s, he wrote a poem because of the Nottingham mills, and did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green, all about the pollution they were causing. Well, he was one of these, and he was the student let's see, at Oxford, he was studying, among other things, art history and painting. He was maybe 21 or so. He got the idea in his mind he wanted to establish a colony for the arts and crafts. And he wanted it to be not in England, so it would be heavily influenced by tradition in the past. So he decided he wanted to come to America and establish it somewhere there. So he came to America. This was about 1900. He went out to California, down into the mountains of Georgia, and finally he discovered this little village 110 miles north of New York City called Woodstock. It had initially been settled by the Dutch around 1650. Then England went to war with Holland, and everything in America that had been Dutch, like New Amsterdam, became New York. And other villages, like Woodstock, took on English names. And so he discovered Woodstock, came there, loved it. On the mountainside overlooking the Woodstock Valley, there was the village on the Overlook mountainside. He bought in total almost 5,000 acres. And on 500 acres overlooking the valley and the village, he built his art colony on these 500 acres and built studios and a theater and galleries and homes and studios, and invited from all over the whole world artists of every description to come there, and they flooded just to have this communion with one another. And that was the beginning of the colony in 2?
Yeah.
1902. And what a heaven place it was. It was all in the craftsman style, beautiful style.
It's all still there.
Yeah.
It's all very active.
Yeah,
It's the Woodstock Colony of the Arts now. It's a co-op, but the theater is still there, and the cottages are all still there. People come all the time, and they have all kinds of art classes and lectures and all, just kind of things. Same kind of things that you do over here to keep your place going. They do the same thing, and they have a down in the town. The guild has a big hall where they have all kinds of offerings of lectures and music and all kinds of things. And they have a store there, a craft store, where you can still buy some of the crafts that people make, like jewelry and some of the smaller things. But they got into the big things like furniture, and a lot of it was in the mission style because that's what was going on there. It's very hard to find anything today that in Woodstock or in that area of the furniture and stuff that was made there. There's a few pieces around, but it's very difficult to find. But some of the houses have some of it, but it very seldom find it anywhere on the market or hear anybody. If you look at roadshow or you look at auction folders, you'll see for mission stuff from Pennsylvania places and Jersey places, but you very ever see anything that came from the Birdcliff colony in Woodstock.
The Kleiner Gallery.
Huh?
I think in the Kleiner.
Yeah, well, I mean, see, there's a few things, but it's very small. It's not, the production wasn't great, but they had very good craftsmen there, and they did all kinds of everything that you could think of in craft, and it's still very viable.
What's your first memories of each other?
First memories? I can't say that I actually can remember the first day I met him or saw him. I'm sure it was just because of school. The school we went to was very small. It was kind of crazy because the school was in 3 places. Just outside on the hill coming down the main street, there was the first, second, and third grade.
First and second.
Yeah. Then you went, and then you went down the hill,
A bit of the-
and then there was a a small building, and that had the 3rd and 4th grade in it.
And then before that, a large,
And in front was a large school, which originally was the whole school,
yeah.
but it had 2 rooms in it, and then that was the 7th and 8th grade was in that one, and the 6th, 5th and 6th were in this one. So when I came to school, I came to 4th grade, and we started in the 4th grade in this room in the back. But it was we had a very good school there. We had an art teacher who was
quick.
Mrs. Quick. If you looked at her, you would. If you looked at her,
What was her first name?
Mrs. Quick.
Mrs.
First names.
No, her first name was a Roman name, Fastia. Fastia quick.
But she was so good. She had this husband that was
Well, what did he do?
nothing. He didn't do anything. All he did, he had a beagle dog, which he said was the best hunting dog there ever was. The dog never went out of the yard, but he walked up and down the street with this dog. They had a lovely house, and it was all Mrs. Quick. But she was so good with us. We had all kinds of projects. She did our music, and she did our art. We used to go out and do sketch classes outside. One year we made a calendar, and everybody made a block print of the month that they wanted to have, and then we had a contest who picked out which one they liked. I should have brought that along, damn it, I forgot it. And we made this, and then we gave them for Christmas presents to our parents. We made a salt thing of the Parthenon one time. It took us a whole year to make that.
A salt? What do you mean?
Made out of salt?
Yeah, well, you make it into a paste and then put it over cardboard and stuff like that. And we had a little thing, she had a box that she gave you each one, and you had a little thing, and you bunged it when your number came up and all that kind of. But she did, we did basketry, all of the different arts that she exposed us to. And then once a year in the gallery in the center of town, there was always a display of the school kids' art, everybody's art. If you painted a picture, it was up there, so
That was
everybody
in the
could.
Woodstock Art Gallery?
Woodstock Gallery, yeah. So so there was a very fine little school. But the big thing there was that every Halloween, we were told, don't get into the school and ring the bell. So of course, that was throwing the gauntlet down. And I remember the last time they told us there's going to be police in there, there's going to be all kinds of people in there. So don't try to do it. We rang the bell anyhow, there was never anybody there. But outside there was a hill, that's called the Mill Hill, Mr. Wagner's shop there.
The principal.
Yeah, and then we could go out at recess. We had to have recess in the morning, and in the afternoon we could go out and sleigh ride. But as soon as the bell rang, we had to come right back into school. And we were good about that, so we used to go out there and sleigh ride, and after school we had, and then one of the things that memorable for me is when the infantile paralysis scare came to town. And that summer we were all told not to swim or go to movies or do anything. And one of the boys and one of the girls in our school got infantile paralysis.
Who was that?
Holmes. He had, his leg always had a limp after that. And Kiki Randolph, she was in an iron lung for a while, but she lived to be quite a ripe old age. She did have a little limp in one of her legs, but she became the editor of one of the town papers and so forth.
So the other one was Holmes Finch?
Holmes Finch, yeah. That was the poorest family in town. It was about 20 kids and 2 derelict parents, and they ran all over the place like ants.
They were all adopted.
God, it was,
Tom, you had
they lived in a house that was, but we had full run of the town. I'd come home at night. My mother'd say, my rule at my house was, you see, Albert, that chair, at 6 o'clock at night, you will be in that chair for dinner. No excuses, nothing. You can go anywhere you want in the day, but you'll be there. And so that, and if I wasn't, then it might be 10 days of detention. Not can't go out at all.
What about Mr. Reynolds?
Well, tell me about the cows across the street. You know Mr. Reynolds.
Mr. Reynolds lived next door to our house and directly across from Albert's. And Mr. Reynolds was a deputy sheriff, wasn't he?
Yeah, he worked at the night shift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a county.
Yeah, so he had the days free,
But he also had, how many, about 5 cows?
That's about all, yeah.
5 cows and chickens and gardens and, what would you say, 10 acres?
Yeah, he didn't have too much there. Yeah.
The cows, of course, had the free reign of that 10 acres, mostly back, woodsy, pasturey kind of place. And Al and I had our work to do, hunting for turtles and lizards and frogs. Even, I think there was some fishing back there, wasn't there?
Oh, yeah. Well, we love to explore. We love to explore. When Tom, get into that, behind Tom's house was a chicken coop. And when I got there, they'd already had that cleaned out. And he doesn't remember where he got it from. But they had an operating pinball machine in there. We had a nickel that we slid in. Once in a while, the nickel disappeared for a candy bar, then we had to get another nickel. But we could play that, and Tom had put shelves all up, and we had a Tom girl, and that wore pigtail, and she did anything we
What
would
was
do.
her last name? Fraser?
A grazer.
Grazer.
Yeah, and so we would collect, if we found a bone or a colored rock or skull, anything, and we'd put it up on the shelf in there. And that was our clubhouse. And we would run all over any place. Somebody'd say they'd seen something someplace, and we went to find it. Well, one thing, we were told once that there was a coal mine up on the side of the mountain where the blacksmith used to get a little coal for his forge. Well, we spent about a week looking for that. We finally did find it. It was just a little cave in the side of the mountain, but it was very historical. It was something to see. Not everybody knew where it was. Tell them about, we're talking about that, tell them about Lewis Hollow and the Irish Colony.
What about Mr. Reynolds?
Mr. Reynolds.
The cows, we haven't heard about
Oh,
the
you
cows.
haven't finished with the cows yet?
He had these 5 cows, and Mr. Reynolds was in control of the cows. Wherever he was on his property and wherever the cows were, Mr. Reynolds would go out and he would loudly call, "Cow boss! Cow boss! Cow boss!" Like this, and the cows would, wherever they were, they'd come one after the other, right before Mr. Reynolds. "Yes, Papa, what?"
Followed right into the barn.
"Come on, let's go, right?" So,
I have good milk for you.
would be out on the property, and Mr. Reynolds, well, he was 10 miles away because he was in the sheriff's department.
Oh, he was busy
But
man.
then the property was essentially ours, and we would be way over there, and there were the cows way over there, and we would say, "Cow boss, go!" And the cows would come all the way over from wherever they were, looking for Dad. And they would stand and look at us and sort of disregard us. "Where are you?"
You say cow bus.
I say the same as he did. Don't
Well, you were good at it.
He was good.
But and his wife was a little, well, she wasn't too tall, and she was a little heavy-set lady. Her name was Dorjean.
Dora Jean.
Yeah, they kicked her on set. But she was good to us. He took good care of us boys.
Well, here's how she took care of us once. We fished, we hunted for lizards and God knows what, and we were fishing. My fishing pole was a bamboo
Rug pole.
rug pole,
You've ever seen rugs in new
Around.
parks? They come wrapped up on a.
about 7 feet long, and Christmas cord tied to the end with a hook and a night crawler a worm, a big wiggling worm about that long. So there was the beautiful Sawkill Creek came, the Tannery Brook.
Tannery Brook.
Came through town, made its way, became a little broader river, and then there was a rocky waterfall with a dam. And Al and I were both fishing one day. Al had his pole. Is yours a rug pole? Anyway, there we were, and we, put the worm on the hook, threw it in, and waited. You couldn't see to the bottom. It was a big, deep pool with the waterfall coming over. And all of a sudden, something, oh, God, I pulled. And what was it but an eel? And this big around, big guy. Oh, God, nothing like that had ever happened to us.
Well, we were screaming and yelling, and people were coming out of
And
all of
people
these
came
buildings.
People came out everywhere. And here was this big thrashing eel like this, and we got him all the way up to the ledge where we were sitting. And there he was, still wiggling as he was. I don't know what we did. What did we do to get him out?
Well, they brought us a gunny sack, which the only thing you can grab an eel with is a gunny sack.
Managed to get him in the gunny sack. And what are we going to do with this? So we brought him over to my house. I don't know where my mother was, but there was Dora Jean, the sheriff's wife. And she said she would take care of it. She would, and she did a wonderful, memorable thing. She cut it all up, cooked it, and Al's family got this, and we got this, they got that.
But I can still remember she had it cut up in pieces about this big. When she put it in the pan, it still wiggled.
Oh,
What did it
I
taste
remember
like?
Eels do that.
after the dinner, Al was
But the thing was, the thing was that where we're talking about, this is why it was called the Tannery Brook, because originally that's what Woodstock was formed on. This brook came down and dropped off a ledge which was a bit higher, half again as high as this room. And these rocks all stuck out, and we were standing on these rocks. And so these people thought we had fallen in, and so they all came running, and then there was this restaurant there called the Nook, and the people all came out of that, and the real estate office was here, and the barber shop was there, and all these people came out and to see what was going on. And we got written up in the paper that week. The little town had a little paper, came out every week. There was a big article about it in the paper.
Overlook.
Yeah, and Mr. Graver used to ask us a long time after he'd remind us of that story and how they all came out. They were ready to save us, and that was a good story. But that's the kind of things that we do. Oh, Woodstock.
was it tasty? Was the eel good? Besides that it was jumpy.
That was a little while ago to remember.
Do you remember something?
She's asking our age. I don't know about that. No, I don't remember what it was, but I remember. All I remember is it wiggled when she put it in the frying pan.
Oh my God.
No wonder you both look so good. You drank raw milk from a neighbor and caught all these natural things.
That is very true. I was just talking about that with some people the other day. We're talking about. Of course, this is it's just right after the Depression. There was still a lot of, and I know for my family, we had a family farm. My mother did, and we used to go visit that, and they used to ply us with all kinds of fresh vegetables and fruit. And I know that we grew up with that stuff. And Tom's parents always had a little garden in the backyard, and we had plenty of. Dave Mazzetti had his vegetable stand up there with his hard cider jugs in the back.
Al's mother's family were from the earliest Dutch settlers in that area. When did they come, about 1650?
Yeah, it was very early, yeah. Yeah,
16.
I have it all written. I had a cousin who retired, and he did it all the way back to Holland, yeah. So,
Can you speak Dutch?
no, well, yeah, I'll tell you, Dutch word, hockey hole. You know what that means? That means a dirty spot in the corner. And my mother and my aunt still used that word. I remember, there was another one too, but I can't remember, but they had to go clean a hockey hole.
Oh.
So that,
I was
yeah.
wondering if you can say, don't worry, be happy.
No, I can say that. Yeah. But that, you know, we were talking about this colony that they had there, and then there got to be some dissension in that colony, and
Other colonies were formed.
and the most famous one was called the Maverick. And the reason it's called the Maverick, it's still there today. The originator of that, Harvey White, he carved, it was like a telephone pole piece of wood trunk, and he carved it in, it goes up like this, a Maverick horse. And that, he had that at the front of his house, and it's still there. And
Would you say 18 feet high?
yeah, oh yeah. And he built this colony there of artists that he took away from the other place. They were, you know, they were English, so they were very restrictive, and things had to be done this way and that way. And
And the artists, many of them didn't like
they
that
they didn't want that kind of formality. You had to run around all dressed up all the time, you know. They were, you know, really very English. And so these people went over, and he bought this land over there. They had nothing. They took a collection to drill a well. It was the first expense that they had because they needed water. And they just lived in shacks and tents around in the woods there. But they started to do good things, they, you know, music and other things like that. And they built a summer theater, which is still there today, and is the oldest.
Very rustic and beautiful.
It's open air, but it's still the oldest chamber music continuous summer concert series in America. It's over 90 years old. And we get the famous and the near famous come there every Sunday afternoon. People come from many, many miles around to come to these concerts of all the internationally famous anybody that chamber music lover. So yeah, it's very, very, very nice, and the music is great. You're outside, and really good. And
You built your first house in the Maverick.
oh yes,
Yeah, I
yeah,
lived
yeah. Tell them about your
one of
first
the
house.
old
Yeah.
homes.
He joined
We
the
lived
community.
there, shortly after my former wife and I married. We moved to Woodstock and lived in the Maverick in one of these old studio homes. No running water, no electricity, a hand pump, and an outhouse. And you had to plan your day in a totally different way. You had to get up twice in the middle of the night in the winter to fill the fireplace and the stove. We had a wood stove and a fireplace, and that heated us, and it was quite comfortable. If you tended the stove and the fireplace regularly, keep it going. But I can remember once checking the temperature in the middle of the night, and it was below 25 below, 24 below zero. Can you imagine? And you have to go to an outhouse.
But this water,
And get a thunderpop.
but this water is not frozen, right? This water.
There wasn't any water.
That's huge.
Not in the outhouse.
But then in the Maverick, they became famous for having what they called the Maverick Festivals. And this got to be very internationally famous. The artists that were there in this theater, they would put on these productions. They lasted about week to 10 days,
Yeah.
where they'd have all.
Well, some of the greatest musicians in the world,
Yeah.
like Misha Elman, lived there. He liked it so much, he built a house which happened to be right next to ours.
Yeah.
And famous cellists, I mean, it was,
And the flautist.
the flutist, who
Yeah.
was that?
I can't remember the name, but he was there.
famous,
Yeah.
yeah.
And then we had Alex lived there, Mr. Koslov.
Oh, Alexis Koslov. That was interesting. I'm glad you brought that up because this Alexis Koslov had escaped Russia at the time of the Russian Revolution and came to America with his family, and he settled in Woodstock. There was a Russian colony in Woodstock. He settled there, and I remember as a boy, he was the most remarkable looking man, like wonderful physical form, and wore a cape and carried a little violin. He was famous. And then later, much later, when I discovered Meher Baba and first went to the Winterfeld's Monday night meetings, I met Margaret Krask. And when she found out I was from Woodstock and that I knew who Alexis Koslov was, she was overwhelmed and invited me to lunch and told me that she was so close to Alexis Koslov and his wife, and she went so often to Woodstock to visit them. Well, I'll tell you a little something that happened. This was not supposed to happen to Tom. It happened to somebody else. Years went by, I married. We were living in Woodstock. It's 1965. I built my first house. We were living in that house. And the word came out in the paper that Alexis Kozlov's wife, this ballet master, famous ballet master, the wife passed away. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter, who lived far away someplace. Well, the very next year, Alexis himself died. He was like 90-something. And the children came in, and it was in the paper, they were planning a big estate sale, because they lived in a marvelous big house. And get this straight now, there he was, they're living in this big house. They were going to have, Saturday was coming up, and that was the estate sale. And it also came out in the paper that who really was Alexis, but the nephew of Tsar Nicholas II. And it was never made known because the communists were even sending people to various other countries to kill. Like they killed the Tsar and his wife and a whole family. And anybody who, like a nephew, get him. And so he never let anybody know, but there it was in the paper. He was the nephew of Tsar Nicholas. So I knew that in this big house, this marvelous big Victorian house, they had lots of treasures, and I thought, wow, what an estate sale this is going to be. But Saturday came, and Tom, something came up which prevented me totally from going. I had to do this and not that. But who went but a young fellow? His name was Kim Chalmers.
Oh, I remember Kim Chalmers. Yeah.
And he and his sister were every Monday night at our Baba meetings. And Kim, his father had been a big TV director, very well-off guy. And he got into gambling and women and alcohol, and he lost all of his money, and he was sitting on a bar stool at the Irvington Inn and fell off the stool and died. Mom was left poverty-stricken in a little hut. They had nothing. But what did Kim, the son, do? He went to Alexis Kozlov's big estate sale, and he bought a truck, a little wooden, what would you call it?
Chest.
Little
Chest
chest.
with a curved top.
Like a treasure box.
Paid something like $6 or $7 for it. He just happened to like it. And it was lined inside with old leather. And he brought it home, and Mom was so upset that he'd spent that $7 on this. And, oh, God. Oh. So the neighbor was an antique dealer, and he said, it could be worth, don't worry about it, it's worth much more than $7, like maybe a couple of hundred. So what I advise you to do is take it down to New York. It's over 200 years old. Bring it to Christie's auction house in New York and consign it. So they drove all the way down, got to Christie's and consigned it.
Well, this is considerable because at that time it was 5 or 6 hours to drive to New York for
No,
us.
why that long? No.
Yes, it was. Yes.
Anyway, here they are, they're back.
Yeah, it was
The
an
next
exhausting
morning-
trip.
The next morning, the phone rings. Christie says, get back down here, we have discovered something within the chest. It's very important, we'll tell you all about it, but come down right away. If you can. So, we drove all the way down to New York, and what did they find behind the leather on the top of the chest? But the original document of the sale of Alaska to America.
Oh my God.
Seward's Folly. The signature of Abraham Lincoln, Tsar Nicholas I, and Seward. And there it was. In mint condition, there it was. And so they consigned it. And it brought back then 1.7 million.
Tom, so what was Bob
And,
doing?
you know, government bonds were bringing 7%, so figure that out.
What was Baba doing in India?
And now, I just want to tell you what was happening at this time. That Tom was planning to go to the sale, and Tom would have bought that. So people were visiting from, I think they were some people from Belgium were visiting Mirazad. And they were, you know, Baba's helpers were talking to them, and they noticed Baba sitting way over there by himself, and he was doing this. And they said, could I ask you something? What are they doing? What is Baba doing? And one of the Mongols said, oh, he's doing his work. He's doing his work. Tom will not go to Tom is not going to the auction. He's going to stay home. Otherwise, whoa, I would have gone way over there and way over there.
Well,
Maher who?
Well, I have a Russian story too. It's not quite as good as that. But this is a lady. She was a genuine Russian princess. Her name was Princess Nina. And we knew Nina from when we were small kids. We would go down. We used to go down to the brook like 8 o'clock in the morning and stay there till 5 o'clock at night. And, running around with nothing but a bathing suit on. It was great. But there was this lady there that was always there, Princess Nina. She was the first person I ever saw in a bikini, and she made her own bikini out of bandanas, one for each side, one for the left, one for the front and back. She was a very small, slim woman, always in the best of shape. She could do all the Zen and any of those kind of position, and she used to do them on the rocks there, practicing her yoga.
In front of many people.
In front of everybody. But she taught he and I how to swim. She made us jump in the water, and she would go in there with us, and she would make us swim. by the end of the summer, she'd be darker than he is. And she would be there all day long, almost every day. She was a sun worshiper. But she was a very good artist. She could paint, she could sculpt, she could do pottery. She was very good. She did, I have a couple of her things that she did, that she gave me. Eventually, she lived in a house that I had, and she lived to be just over 100 years old. But she would tell the stories of how she got out of Russia. And she said that they were so poor, and it was such a traumatic experience getting out and have no food. She said they would eat dirt just to keep their stomachs full and feed it to the children just to keep their stomachs full so they wouldn't cry in agony because they were trying to escape. They had to try to keep the children quiet. And she married some German baron or something, and they had a pact. He needed a wife to get over here, and she needed a husband to get over here, and they got married, knowing that once they got to Canada, they would split up, which they did, and they never heard from each other again. But she came and lived in Woodstock, and when she died, we went through her things, and you know these little enamels that you see from on the ivory paintings. She had one of those for all. We assume they were for her family. I only saw them, the people that had the estate took those, and I'm sure they got mega bucks for them, but they were the real thing. But yeah, it was interesting to talk to her. She was bedridden a lot of the time in her later years, but she was so interesting to talk to, and she was very, very good. I thought she was a great lady. But yeah, that's the kind of people that Woodstock attracted and still does today.
The show was, I want to hear.
We haven't got there yet.
I know. I wanna hear.
Is everybody in a hurry to leave? No, we're not in a hurry to leave yet. But that's what we did all that kind of stuff. And of course, Tom's family, you can tell a lot. You have local history there with
my
Lewis
father,
Hollow and so
at the
forth.
time of the great famine in Ireland, 1845, but in around 1847, my father's and my mother's family left Ireland and came to America. And now at this time there was an Irishman living in Dublin. His name was Ian Lewis, and he had begun back in the late 1830s a business of importing glassware and ceramics from Ireland to New York City, and he was now living in New York City. And by the time the famine came, he had made a fortune. He was very, very wealthy. And when the famine arrived, he was deeply preoccupied with the tragedy of the whole thing, what it had done to the whole nation. So that he wanted to do something that would be of benefit to so many people. So he went up into the little farming village in the Catskill Mountains north of New York to Woodstock, because in the mountains nearby there were many, many stone quarries, what were known as bluestone quarries, because at that time concrete and cement had as yet not been used for sidewalks and curbstones. So they used these beautiful bluestones that came, there was a igneous sedimentary rock that formed into various layers, and they could get them out. They were beautiful stones and served the purpose of sidewalks so beautifully that all the cities along the Hudson and elsewhere that were growing and developing, and especially New York City, wanted more and more and more of these. So it became, very important industry in itself. So what he did was he bought 800 acres on the side of the mountain, the Overlook Mountain, overlooking the Woodstock Valley. And to people whom he knew and others who were recommended to him, he gave them the wherewithal to build a home, gave them the land, gave them the money to build a home, and money to sustain themselves so they could become self-sufficient. This was such a gift, and my father's grandfather was one of those people. And so my father was born in Woodstock later.
And tell them what they called the place.
They called it after this, the name of this individual, Lewis Hollow, and it's actually part of Woodstock now.
And
The
they-
outskirts, but it overlooks the Woodstock Valley.
And I was always told the story about the Irishmen that were all there, that every morning when they got up and had their breakfast, they took their sheepskin. They all had a sheepskin, and they had their hammer and their chisels. They all had their own chisels and everything that was for them. The sheepskin was to sit on because the rock was cold. And they went to the quarry and they cut the stone. They, probably worked 12, 14 hours a day. And that they would come home and they would plow and work their gardens by moonlight.
I hadn't heard that.
And then there was a small building that's still there that was their tavern. And I guess Saturday night, you know how the Irish are, and I guess they had was known for some gay times were had never heard. But this
There was
blue
a lot of
stone,
that was put upon them
well,
that wasn't true. Because my father said, because many of them spoke Gaelic, and
Yeah.
because they were Irish and it was an English settlement, my father said when he was a little boy, in the morning they would have to leave very early to walk to the school, which was like 1.5 miles away. And the other children would throw things at them and call them names. Because
Yeah,
they
there was
were Irish. Yeah.
all kinds of prejudice
Suffered
even then.
Terrible, terrible
Yeah.
things. So lots of stories built
Yeah.
up, which were.
But that blue stone, that's part of the base for the Statue of Liberty, is one of the biggest places that it is.
Is that right?
Yes, it's part of the Statue of Liberty stone, yeah, the blue stone. And the thing was that these quarries was to see who could cut out the biggest, thickest, and heaviest piece of bluestone and get it to the river in Kingston, which was about 12 miles away, without cracking it. And there's pictures in various books, you can see these huge things where they have team after team of oxen pulling these great big big slabs. They put them on at Saugerties or at Kingston. Down at the foot of Kingston, there's still a bluestone building there, beautiful building. And all around that was a big bluestone yard where they loaded the barges into New York. And the industry was very tough. Well, Tom's father even used to cut stone. We used to go with him to
He loved that.
the quarry, and in the afternoon sometimes, and he'd be out there in the quarry cutting
Yeah, he
stone.
loved that,
Yeah.
reminding him of the past.
Yeah, so it was a very big industry in the Catskills for quite a
Well,
number
you know,
of years.
I don't know whether you know this or not. My father's grandfather, there were 3 men who discovered the California quarry, and he was one of them. And that was one of the hugest quarry, and with the very best stone.
Yeah.
And it was so successful and hired so many men that they called it after the 49 gold rush in California. They called it the California.
Well, it was internationally known as the
Yeah.
best bluestone quarry there was. It was, and
Yeah,
it
the
was huge.
Stone was so superb and beautiful.
It was a very big industry for a long time.
The lizards.
Oh,
The lizards.
oh, never.
I
We haven't
about
got to
lizards.
that. We haven't grown up yet. You gotta
No,
let us grow up
this is-
first.
No,
Yeah.
no, I want.
Oh, well, all right, we have
There's
to.
something very important.
I know, we have to, our host,
Al and I
my
were
host
known-
needs,
We were known in Woodstock as very specific kind of hunters. We hunted for frogs, turtles,
Lizards,
lizards,
Salamanders.
salamanders.
snakes, anything we could catch.
Reptilian.
Well, we found, I don't know whether you remember this one, but we found, now, owl, you know, people came to Twin Gables, honestly, from various parts of the world.
Oh,
They
we've
did,
had the
because
famous and near
Woodstock
famous.
was an international place.
Oh,
These
yeah.
people are from Istanbul, these people are from
Oh.
South America. And these folks, I want you to meet them, they're from Germany
Oh,
and Switzerland, and so they were from all over.
Mhm.
And they love to sit in front of Al's
We had a big bluestone,
vast
talking about bluestone, we had a
terrace
bluestone terrace.
full of chairs, wooden chairs and tables, and they love to sit there and communicate. So we took advantage of this and came up with the idea of putting on a show, and we could make some money. Some serious money, get this.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Up to 5, maybe 7 cents an hour.
If we were lucky.
Yeah, and so anyway, we loved catching these little creatures and what to do with them. But we put them to use, and we devised showtime for these people. And we mentioned it to a few, and they said, "Oh, really good, cool, yeah, yes, really good." So, for instance, we caught 2. I remember this was one small part of the early shows. 2 lizards. What would you say, that long? One was black with white spots. They had big little ears and everything, but no teeth, but a tongue. And, okay, 2, and the other one was orange with black spots. And they did not associate with each other. We'd find this one up on above that hill, and the other one down there near the water. And so we would make sure that they never saw each other. But one was on a table here, the other was on a table here, quite close together, like this, and a box over each one, a little cardboard box. They've never seen each other. And all the people are sitting around.
Just like you.
They've all paid 5 cents each. And all of a sudden, the boxes are lifted. They come up and put on a display when they see each other. People are,
Now, how old,
Then
how
we do
old
the
were
same
you?
thing with frogs.
Okay,
Yeah, well, we used
how
to-
old?
Well, we
Huh?
How old were you?
oh, we weren't even,
9,
I don't think, we
10.
weren't even teenagers then.
Oh, 10.
This Twin Gables that we had big cellar holes, big holes, cellar. And so there was about this deep and it was damp and we could keep all these frogs and stuff in there and they couldn't get out. And then on this table, on each side, we put a stick up like this and a wire across between the 2 sticks. Of course, everybody wondered what they were. And then we'd take our frogs, we'd take a couple frogs and we'd hang the frogs would hang on by the twig. And we put the lizards up there and they would hang on, And this was our tight-roping animals, And then we
Oh,
had,
and then we caught at one time, we went on a turtle hunt. And honestly, we had, wouldn't you say, at least 25 turtles?
we had 2 gunny sacks full.
2 gunny sacks
All we
full
could
of
carry as
various
kids.
kinds of turtles, each one about this big around.
That's heavy.
And what to do with them. So,
Don't ask us why we collected them, because we can't tell you.
well, it must have had something to do with our show.
I don't know
Some
what.
of them would. Anyway, there was, I don't remember who owned the pig pen, But it was in the center of town. It could have been the Reverend Todd, or it could have been Mr. Cousins.
I think it was probably Mr. Cousins.
Mr. Cousins. But no more pigs were in the pig pen, but there it was. And it was all boards coming around on the bottom, but it was all sort of muddy and dry dirt and mud. And we said, let's put them in there. They won't be able to get out because the wood came up about this far, right down to where the dirt was. So we put them all, I think we got Mr. Cousins' permission.
I don't
Yeah,
remember.
but there they were, and they were all 25 or 30 of them. And where do we go? They couldn't get out.
At least we thought.
We
they
thought, but in the middle of the night, we didn't think about this.
Oh, yeah.
And they dug down and got under wood and got out.
So
And the
about 2 days later,
no, the day.
no, after we picked, we got them, we put them in there. We came downtown. Everybody was saying, "Have you seen the turtles? It's just, where did the turtles come?
And
They're all
all
over.
the
Look at the village
screeching.
green. There's
Oh my
turtles. They're going down the street. Where are all these turtles? Why do we have this invasion of turtles? Why did we disappear? We didn't dare go to town for a week. Every one of them got out. Every one. It was something else. Yeah. That
Oh,
was
we
the end of
upset
that.
you. Don't, oh my God.
Wow.
She had turtleitis.
Did we scare her away? Oh dear, I'm sorry.
So,
We can be long-winded.
a quick question, is that a bluestone on your?
That's which, no, this I just bought here. It's turquoise. Yeah. But Woodstock was an interesting place to grow up because we were exposed to all of these things. We had a wonderful summer playhouse there, the Woodstock Playhouse that was internationally known. Every play had at least one Broadway star in it. And, they had all these young people. Some of them used to stay with us. And if they worked in the theater for the summer, they got their equity card. And they worked. They had 1 day a week off. The show went to Sunday night. They struck the show, which they got out about 2 to 4 o'clock in the morning. They had Monday off. And right away, Tuesday, they were back out again. And every week, while they were learning, producing this show, they were learning the next show. So, but it was really good. And I can still remember seeing the Fiddler on the Roof there. I can still see that guy on the roof fiddling. They really did very, very excellent productions. And then the other playhouse we had, like we said, over in the Maverick, not only did they make the music shed, but they had a theater called the Maverick Theater. And this was a legitimate summer stock theater too. And then you've all heard of Lee Marvin.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he was born in Woodstock. He was in the Marines and he came home and he was working for the local plumber as a plumber's helper. And you see him on the green in his khakis afterwards and so on and so forth. And then he got a part in the Maverick. I don't know why they needed somebody like him or something. He got a bit part in the Maverick. And the person that was managing the Maverick that summer took him with the whole company, and they went to New York and started the Circle in the Square. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. It's still there. I was there to a play last year. And if you get their playbill, on the inside it tells about the name of this manager, and I can't remember for the life of me, that ran the Circle in the Square for 50 years. So that's how Lee Marvin got his start.
And Tom, tell your Lee Marvin story.
Yeah.
Tell your Lee Marvin story.
Remind me.
Just that you went to school with him.
Oh yeah, he went into the Marine Corps and had not as yet finished high school.
Right.
Went into the Marine Corps and then
Came back.
Yeah.
came back, and we became good friends because we sat together we had to go to high school. It was, 12 miles away?
45-minute ride to school, yeah, on the bus.
We got very acquainted, and then he got discovered, and I remember he used to be a frequenter of that
Yeah.
wonderful Sea
Well, he
Breeze
went with-
Tavern.
He had his high school sweetheart, Pam,
Yeah.
in there. Then he went off to Hollywood and all these women, wine women in song. And then he
Yeah.
came to life and he came back and married Pam.
Yeah,
And
he wanted nothing more than to get away
Yeah.
from Hollywood.
so
Tell
she
him
inherited the ranch and everything that was
You
his.
have no idea
What's that?
how horrible it is out
Yeah.
there. It's so full of self-interest and the cult of me, and they don't care about anyone. Love did not prevail.
And you must have told him about Mayor Baba.
So tell me, I can't remember.
So you told me that he heard you were involved with Mayor Baba, and
Oh,
he
yeah. Oh,
said
that was a little
later, and
yeah.
he said to you,
Tell me.
he said he had wished that his life had taken the turn that yours did.
Oh, yeah.
That he, that was what was
Yeah,
important to
but I
him.
was so fortunate to
Yeah.
have discovered.
Oh, yeah, but if we could, we had, we don't have them all, but if we had a list of the names of the artists, musicians, any kind of sculpt, anything to do with any of the arts that has passed through Woodstock, it would really be surprising.
Oh, yeah.
Some of them you got to know, some of them you didn't get to know. Having this lodging place that we had in Woodstock, the famous and near famous came through there. They stay with us, and a lot of them had homes there, so when they closed up the home, they would stay with us, or when they opened up the home, they'd come and stay with us. And it's just an endless name of people. And of course, it was close to the city, so they could come and go as they want. And there's still many, many people coming and going there of well-known in any of the art fields. Yeah. It's still a very popular place. It still has a lot of people come up for weekends on a Saturday and Sunday if you drive
It's a
through.
difficult place for artists,
Yeah.
because it's just
Well,
too expensive.
But one of the reasons the artists came there was because, like you said, the peace and quiet and the light. The Catskill Mountains has a light that all artists love. And they weren't all necessary in Woodstock. Some of them were around in other places too. But they have this famous Hudson Valley School of Painters, which were all, and that's with the big attraction for them was the light of the Catskills. That's what they came for. And if you ever go to see their studios, they're all pointed with a certain north light, which has attracted many, many of them.
Yeah, constant light.
Yeah, it's good.
Any questions?
The only question valid is who am I? That's what Baba says.
Yes. We may discover that someday.
Is
I can
Opus
tell you, I can
40, I
tell you
was there
pretty-
once years
You
ago.
went to
Opus
Opus
40,
40?
is that also,
Yes.
what stone is
Tom
that also?
Riley's friend.
Opus 40 was a sculpture that was done by Harvey Fite. He bought one of these old bluestone
So
quarries
it was bluestone.
and he spent his lifetime making it into a sculpture. He did it all himself, with, he had mechanical means, of course, but he did it all himself.
Right.
He took this old quarry and made it into a living sculpture
Where
with the
was
blue
that?
stone, and he had some other sculptures that he made too. It's now is open occasionally as a museum, and you can go there.
There
Yeah.
was a concert once years
That's
ago.
in Xena,
Saugerties.
Where?
on the way between Xena and Saugerties, in the high woods.
Oh,
You have to go down the back road.
Concerts
Concerts
there.
there, they have concerts.
Concerts there now,
Very
yes.
beautiful.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The how I knew Harvey, 2 doors up from me was a British lady, I don't know where she came from, but she had 2 children. And I used to babysit the children when Harvey was courting her.
Oh,
And so that's how I got to know him and the 2 children. And the one child, the oldest one, when he was young, he grabbed a boiling water from the stove and squirted it out. But I don't know what happened to the 2 children. I don't know if they're still alive or not. But they did have it, their mother made a museum out of it. I think it's still going strong. But yes, they've had concerts and stuff there. Yeah, that's right, I forgot about that. Important place. But the stream still runs through the town. People still go down there, still go down there to swim. And it's still, around it is absolutely beautiful.
Are you gonna start giving guided tours and charge money?
Oh, no, there's a box, as you leave, there's a box.
5 cents.
Wait a minute, wait, now listen, we were arguing about the price of the signatures. Now, did we come to that? How much yours is worth and how much mine is worth?
The signatures? Oh, you mean,
We've gotta make some money out of this somehow.
thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Let me just say something. You know, I came down here to visit Tom probably 10 years since I've seen him. I don't know much about, you know, you're over here and all at Obama and all this stuff. But I must say, you're all a bunch of loves. And I know I can see that you're all full of love. And you have a lot of love to give. And that's, what else is there? It's been very important, been a very important week for me. I've really enjoyed being with people that love comes out so easily. It's great.
So,
I just want to say, and this is something I know, he didn't just say that because he wants you to put more money in it.
That's because my signature's going to be cost more. Thank you once again for coming.
and I,
First car we bought, $50. $50. It was a 32 Chevrolet. We bought it from one of his friends that lived down there in Sawkill. We knew him through high school, and they said they had this old car. And in those days, you didn't have to have any insurance or anything like that. We just took the registration down, and they gave us the plates, and we put the plates on this car. And Tom lived just enough out of the village so that we could go out of his driveway and go up to the Glasgow Turnpike and go up into these back roads and practice driving. So that's what we did. So then after we got this car, we decided it was pretty shabby. It needed paint. Oh, it needed a lot of things. So we went to Montgomery Ward's and we went into the paint department and asked the guy about paint. Oh, he said, go down to the tractor department. So we went down and the agriculture, and they sold us a quart of black tractor paint and a quart of red tractor paint and brushes. And we had one of our school teachers' husband had worked in Detroit, or I don't know where, maybe it wasn't Detroit, but someplace. He'd worked in a car manufacturing place that in those days, the old days, they didn't have spray guns. They painted the cars with the brushes. And he explained the kind of brush we should have. Then we should put the car in the sun that it would get warm, and don't go back over the strokes, just go once. So he spent a long time telling us. So we tried to do most of what we did. So the car looked pretty good when we got done. The only trouble with the car was it had these Army surplus tires on it, and they were so stiff and heavy that if you slammed on the brakes too hard, the tire turned on the rim, and so that blew the stem of the tube off, and then we had to keep buying new tube. So we had fun. We drove it around for a bit, but then I think we got $50 when we sold it.
oh,
What are we getting?
I don't know, 25 or $50. Maybe we got 75 for it when we sold it. But anyhow, that was our first car that we had to ride
And then the one
around.
that you went up the mountain with.
Oh, well, his brother, yeah. Well, you tell, that's your
I
brother.
can't remember.
Well, his brother had, of course, we both worked for his brother for the first thing. Oh, we forgot to tell him about and the rest. We'll tell this story first, okay. So we borrowed, again, here we're trying to learn how to drive, you know. And after we sold the car, we didn't have a car, so we borrowed this 32 Ford Woody wagon, with just a 3-speed on the floor. And Tom is driving this, and we're up the back roads. And we didn't know where we were going. And all of a sudden, we turned up this road. And we got up there, and it kept going up there, and it kept going up there. And we got up there, and it got steep, and of course you had to shift down. Well, heck, we didn't know how to shift. He's driving the car, he says, what do I do now? What do I do now? I don't know, what do we do? And then the car stalled out. And seriously, this road is so dangerous, it's only open in the summer, and it's only a dirt road, and it drops off
1,000 feet.
easy. People used to take their old wrecked cars and ride them down. And you look down, there's a half a dozen old cars down there. And we're this far from this edge with this car. What do we do? Well, I got out to see, look, and there was the road had a little indentation in it. And I said, Tom, if you're really careful and you let it back down, maybe there'll be enough room if it comes all the way in the back that we can go down the mountain. He was really good at it. He did it. He just, listened to what I said very, very slowly, just inching off on the brake. And we just got enough to get that car back there that he could crank the wheel around, and we got the car started again. And we got down the mountain. It was really.
And meanwhile, Tom is saying something about Harold, his brother's car.
Well, yeah, we were. Listen, what were we going to do if we didn't bring that car home?
You may not have come home at all.
Good job, Tom.
Well, and the other thing is our first job we had. His brothers, two brothers, they bought what they called a news shop in town. It was a little restaurant, but had cigars, cigarettes, and big wall full of all magazines, and that's where you went to get your newspaper, the Times, and all the papers. So that was our first job in high school, went there. And so we were working there, and who comes in with this famous, who? Jokester.
You know?
Charlie Chaplin?
The man that's famous was famous for his one-liners.
Henny Goodman.
Right, right.
Youngman.
Henny Youngman used to come in every morning for his cigar and his newspaper. And he would sit down and have a cup of coffee, and he would call Tom and I over, and he'd try out his latest one-liner on us. He always had a one-liner. So one morning, Tom says, when Henny comes in this morning, we're just going to go over there, and we're not going to laugh. Not going to laugh. So, you know how serious his face can be. So we walked over, he put on his best Irish face, I put on my best German face, and we just stood there. He never came and told us another joke. That's a true story. Yeah, he had a house in Woodstock, and he was up there most every weekend. That's the kind of people that Woodstock attracted. I can still remember.
Thank you.
If we sit here, we could probably keep telling stories for hours.